My name is Nicholas Ports. Today is April 3rd, 2017. The time is 4 o'clock and we are at St. John's Northwestern Military Academy. I am interviewing Albert Exner, who was born on October 17th, 1925 in Racine, Wisconsin, and served in World War II between 1943 and 1946. Albert Exner was a pharmacist made second class in the Navy and served as a corpsman surgical tech. Thank you for being here, Albert. Let me start off with the question, what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was graduating from Washington Park High School in Racine. And that summer, I went and then enlisted in the Navy, and then until I was called a few months later, I worked at J.I. Case in Racine, wiring things onto flat cars, and also as a lifeguard.
Were you planning to go on to college or further education after high school?
Yes, I was very interested in science. I took all the sciences in high school, which helped me in the recruiting. And I was hoping to go to medical school. That didn't happen, but I did end up in the medical field with Wyeth Laboratories for 38 years in sales management.
Okay. Before the United States draft, how did you view the war?
Well, we were shocked, of course. We were still in high school. We didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was when I happened to be in a gym and putting on my tennis shoes and ready for a basketball game when this other young fellow broke through the locker room and said, the Japanese have just bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, we didn't have any idea where Pearl Harbor was, so forth. So it was a big shock.
And you speak of learning about Pearl Harbor. Did you, or to what extent did you predict the United States would be involved in the war following that attack?
Well, at that time, we were really, there were a lot of unknowns. We really didn't know. That became obvious a little bit later, of course, yeah.
Now, you spoke about going into the military, but how were your early weeks of training and how did you adapt to that?
Well, boot camp was fine. It was at Great Lakes, Illinois, and because of the war, they shortened it from 13 weeks, the boot camp, to 9 weeks. And after that, I was assigned to the meningitis ward at the Great Lakes Hospital because I really was looking for some place where I could learn more about medical stuff. And that was a blessing in disguise because these patients were in a comatose situation with meningitis. They were seriously ill. Their parents were notified they may pass away, they may have brain damage, they may have heart damage. And I was very naive. I didn't know anything about, patient care, and they were doing spinal taps and so forth. So as the good Lord willed it, I met this nurse that was in charge of the ward. And she was a real teacher, and I learned a lot from her, thank goodness, because that paid off very shortly after that.
And where did your training take place?
That training was right there, and when I was only in the service a few months actually, and I was shipped to Europe. And that training was on-the-job training. Now, most corpsmen, I haven't met anybody else that bypassed corps school. I was promoted during the recruiting process. And I think when I look back at this, they were so desperate for people because of the coming Normandy invasion and so forth, that they were desperate for people. So during the interview process, I was promoted, and I couldn't you know, I didn't know what was happening really. I found out later. So, but when I got to Europe for the Normandy invasion, it was on-the-job training in surgery.
Now you speak of this on-the-job training. What were the sanitary standards or procedures like in the war?
We had a scrub, just like the surgeons did, from your elbow right down to your fingertips. One of the things that was very difficult to get and buy, because they were expensive, you know. You used to buy a nail clipper for 15 cents. Well, all that metal seemed to be going into the war, and it was. So if you could find a nail clipper for 50 cents or 75 cents, you were very lucky. So that was an important instrument for us to keep our nails clean and so forth. We were always, well, at Great Lakes in the meningitis ward, we were always masked and gowned. And we had to use sterile technique, of course, and clean between patients. And that was same as true in surgery. So I learned a lot about that. That was necessary. It's not hard to learn.
Sure.
But our skin became so soft from scrubbing in that we were getting so many patients a day that we finally put on two surgical gloves on each hand in the morning and then just took the top one off.
How many patients were you seeing every day, approximately?
Once the Normandy invasion started, 500. Now there were 6 surgical suites, okay? We took over an old building from the British, and that was built in 1860, so you get the vintage there.
Sure, and did that house soldiers, or was it strictly a place to go for medical assistance?
No, this was I had no patient care after I left Great Lakes. It was strictly surgery. And we were doing 500 a day. So our teams, there were 6 teams, surgical teams, and sometimes we had four tables going. I was fortunate to scrub in mostly and help in neurosurgery. And you have to remember that we didn't have a lot of penicillin then, and it was very expensive. It was mostly sulfadiazine tablets and powder. These wounds that were coming to us, and we worked around the clock during the invasion. After 72 hours of no sleep, I remember one orthopedic surgeon did 77 cases before he got away from the table. And of course we had litter bearers that brought them in and took them out. And we didn't have time to rest. After 3 days and nights of no sleep, we went on a 21-hour-a-day schedule. We operated from 6 in the morning till midnight, repacked the sterile packs from midnight till 3 o'clock, and then tried to sleep 3 hours. And I wasn't as big as I am now probably, but in 2 weeks I lost 22 pounds. So.
Wow. Now you spoke of doing surgery in teams. Could you speak on the camaraderie that you formed while serving together?
Well, you did. You met some fellow corpsmen, of course, and you became friends with them, and you did things with them when you had time. So, yes. And the doctors, you know, there was a variety of doctors. There were urologists. There were, like I say, I was lucky to hook up with Dr. Novak from Harvard University in brain and nerve surgery. But again, we didn't have the equipment that they have today. We did not have plates. We did not have electric drills. So it was kind of remote. And these wounds were so dirty, with gas gangrene and gangrene that most of them, except for belly cases, were not sutured. They were simply dressed, and because we were bombed so many times, we shipped these people out at night on the train to go to Glasgow and to back to America by ship. It wasn't the quick evacuation that luckily they have today for the wounded. So.
Now, you were only stationed in Europe, that's correct?
No, that was just the start. After the things started winding down in Normandy, I was shipped over, I came home and had a quick 25-day leave, and then I met my wife-to-be during that period of time, and I was shipped to the Pacific, and I caught the United States USS Lubbock, an amphibious attack transport, and I was assigned to that ship. And I must mention at that point, that ship the keel was laid in May of 1944, and I caught it in October of 44. So without the backing of our industrial prowess, I don't think our government would have won this war, because they made more airplanes, they made more ships, they made more of everything than the enemy could destroy. So that was great.
Now, you spoke of being stationed in the Pacific Theater. Could you give us an approximate geographical reference on a map here, or speak to a piece of it?
Well, Iwo Jima is where we were destined for the invasion of Iwo Jima. This was approximately 600 miles from Guam, and it was actually maybe 600, it was 600 miles from Japan itself. And it was only 5 miles by 3 miles long. And this gives you a little idea of the fortifications that the Japanese had. Now, this place has been bombed constantly for several months, bombarded and bombed by aerial. And all the emplacements here were cross-fired, so to speak, okay? So it was part of our lack of intelligence, actually, that the Japanese were embedded in this. The commandant here, Kuribayashi, a lieutenant general that was assigned to this command, he took down all the fortifications when his troops came in there. He took all the civilians back to Japan, shipped them back, and all that material from those buildings were used in the tunnels and cliffs and so forth in that area. You could see from Mount Suribachi to his place, that's 5 miles. You could go in a tunnel from that point to that point and not come up. So there was a little saying that the Japanese were not on Iwo Jima, they were in it. Mm-hmm. And that was not a nice place for the Japanese to be stationed. It was, Iwo Jima in Japanese means a sulfur island. And the fumes are still coming out of there, and it stinks. I mean, it smells like a paper mill, okay? And actually, our ship brought in some of the 5th Marine Division, 28th Regiment, who were assigned to take Suribachi. And we actually could see them shooting at us and this is when we found out about the zigzag tunnels. I was looking over the side of the ship. I was not allowed to go to shore there at that time. because I was the only surgical tech on the ship. And I saw plops of water maybe 50 yards out, 30 yards out, and I thought, what's going on? I looked up and I saw these 3 Japanese. They had a mortar set up. They were trying to hit our ship. And they called in a destroyer escort and they blasted away, and pretty soon those 3 guys disappeared. 45 minutes later, they were set back up with their mortar and they're shooting at us again. So it was the zigzag tunnels that they had, so that all they had to do was get back into them and they were protected. Then they dug themselves out, and you know. So at Iwo Jima, if you got the picture there, the sand, they called it the black sands of Iwo Jima. That's actually is volcanic ash, but they call it sands. This differs from sand because it's round. So when you step in this, you sink. You see the black part? This shows the invasion beach. The black part is wet. So when you step on it, you sink past your ankles. So this was really a hardship for the Marines that landed there, because the slope was 15 degrees to climb up there. All these gun emplacements were firing at them, and it was devastating. We lost 2,300 the first day, killed and wounded there. They could not get off the beach. There was so much debris there, and the landing field for the troops, the landing people, there was only 3 miles. So they're trying to put down 80,000 Marines in a 3-mile path, but it was just loaded with broken amphibious craft and so forth.
Wow. Now I'm gonna move ahead chronologically just a bit.
Sure.
We know the atomic bombs were dropped in the Pacific Theater, but at the time, did you understand what the atomic bomb meant to war and to the world?
Not really, but we were so happy when they dropped it. And then because we were, after the Okinawa invasion, which we participated in, we were assigned then to start practicing for the landings that were going to come in Japan. And so all the while some of this stuff was going on, you have to realize that we're not only being shelled, but the kamikazes, especially at Okinawa, they just drove you wild night and day, these suicide pilots, you know. And many times I thought that if they ever hit us, I wouldn't get home, you know. So we didn't know much about the bomb. I knew later that the Indianapolis, the cruiser that had done a speed run from the West Coast to Hawaii and then brought it, that was sunk by a Japanese after they unloaded the bomb. But it ultimately saved millions of lives, not only for the Japanese people, but for the American troops. And we would have lost millions, they would have lost millions if that invasion would have taken place.
Sure. And directly following the war, did you immediately go home, or were you stationed elsewhere?
No, I was discharged on Easter Sunday of 1946. I could not get out of the service after the war because the Navy designated that radiomen and corpsmen were essential, and we couldn't get out. I had more than double the points I needed for discharge, but that didn't happen. So.
Wow. Now, could you share with me an example of some strong leadership that you encountered while in the military?
Yeah. Well, for one, in Europe, with Dr. Stanley Novak, the brain surgeon, he was a very highly educated guy, but he was an excellent teacher. And he knew 8 languages. I know he talked to some of the French lady snipers that had to be, one lost an arm, one lost a leg, and he could speak French, so we had to stop this brain case, and he got up and walked over and told him and things like that. But yeah, you meet some good ones and bad ones, but he was just so outstanding. He would stop a case, and I was fortunate to scrub in with and assist in some of his first cases he had ever done. Physicians had not seen some of the devastating wounds that they experienced, so it was a lot of that stuff was very new to them as well. So it was a learning process of both ways. So.
Right, so you speak very admirably of this mentor of yours. What do you consider to be your most important contribution during your service?
I think just being part of that group of trying to save people and stop their suffering, you know. It wasn't easy because there was a lot of blood loss. There was a lot of, you know, when you're 18 and you say you're trying to save somebody, you know, it could pass away, and he did. So that was very difficult.
Sure. Now, you were discharged on Easter. Could you tell us just a bit about the transition from service life to civilian life?
Well, it wasn't very easy. We didn't talk about the service. Nobody asked us about the service. So, here we were, 2021. You felt like you missed a lot of what you were supposed to be doing. You know, you weren't going to school then. So it was different for a long time to get reacclimated, let's so to speak, you know. And I don't know. I went on to school. I worked. I went into sales, and then I finally found my niche, which I wanted in medicine with Wyeth Laboratories and sales, and I enjoyed that close association again with physicians, pharmacists, nurses, and so forth. Yeah.
And what exactly was your job when you came back from the service? What did you go into?
Wyeth Laboratories, and I became a sales manager for 38 years with them. And that's now part of the Pfizer Laboratories. So that's ethical pharmaceuticals. We say ethical because everything is mostly prescription medications.
Mm-hmm. And how were you received by your family when you came home?
Well, my mother, she was a single mother because my father had been killed 5 days before he was 21. Before he was 29, I'm sorry. He was a police officer, and he was killed in the line of duty in Lake Geneva. So she was a widow at 27, and she did not want me to go in the service, of course, because of what happened to my father, our father. And I was 17, and she had a sign for me, which she was very reluctant to do, obviously, for those reasons. And I can't blame her for that. But I explained to her that if she did not sign for me, I would get drafted, and I would get some part of the military that I wasn't looking for. I wanted the medical aspect. So.
Sure. And what are some of the life lessons that you've learned from your military service?
Well, a few things I think that are important. I think cooperation, listening to people, trying to help other people. I've tried to give back some of the things that I think were important. I volunteered with some eye surgeons and went back to the Philippines as an example, 2 years, to bring sight to these people that were blind. And I think it's a real privilege to be part of something like that. It's an honor, you know, to be a volunteer where you can help people in some of these third world countries or even in this country. And I spent a month, 2 years in a row in the Philippines with that. And I've gone to Peru, and that was not a medical mission, but it was clothing and food, which was very interesting as well. How well they found these people that have just in deep poverty, that don't have anything and are living in huts and so forth. So, but that was very rewarding to me to be able to, privileged to be part of that. And also, why we're sitting here today is to know and let you younger folks know what happened, that to keep this thing moving about the sacrifices that so many veterans made in their lives that changed them and hopefully made them better. You know, there's a lot of people that are still devastated with post-traumatic stress syndrome, their wounds and so forth, and they got a lot of healing to do. So I think it's important that the veterans talk about what they did. I don't care what it was. You know, you didn't have to go overseas necessarily, but to be part of that. I think it was important that the kids that didn't get drafted, that were on farms and in factories and that was all contributing to the success of winning the war. So I think all those things are very important. So.
You're obviously speaking very passionately about your fellow veterans. Have you kept in contact with any of them?
A couple of them off my ship and from Europe, but mostly I'm met up with a bunch of fellows in the 8th Air Force, Historical Society and other groups like that. And we've been very nice friends. One's a Marine veteran who was wounded very badly in the war in Vietnam, and some Air Force guys, Navy guys. Mm-hmm.
So you speak of the Air Force veterans. Does that mean you're a part of a veteran organization, or did you guys just meet up?
Well, I spoke at their groups, and then they were so nice and friendly, and I thought they were nice, and I became part of their groups, yeah.
And how would you describe your time served? Was it an honor?
Well, yes, it was. When you look back on it, it was. I don't know exactly how to address that. Hopefully it was an honor to be part of that. Definitely, yes. I could say yes to it. It was an honor, and to be privileged to at least get back and have a life and a wife and a wonderful family. That was. Mm-hmm. I'm blessed that that's happened.
Is there any message that you would like to leave for the future generations?
Well, just again, I think to be helpful to their fellow man and to have some concern about the people that are less fortunate than they are, you know, to be helpful to them and reach out to them. I think that would be a message for them, you know. It goes beyond some of the technology that we have today. You know, you gotta give of yourself before you get something, And like I said before, volunteering is really a privilege and an honor to be able to share some things, not only from your work, but from your service.
Sure, and just touching on the volunteering aspects, was that through any organizations or was that private trips that you took?
Both ways, but the surgical work in the Philippines was done through the free rural eye clinics in Madison, and that no longer exists. We didn't have a clinic over there, but through the years they built one. We were in a very old building that didn't have any facilities there to do the eye surgery. But it was so gratifying, Nick, when these people don't have the health care that they have in our country. And these people, the criteria for operating on those people was you had to be blind in both, excuse me, you had to be blind in both eyes and be indigent. Well, that wasn't hard to find 1,000 people in a month, you know, excuse me. And to have them blind one day and the next day they can see, it's just a real privilege to be part of viewing and seeing that and appreciating that you had a little bit of something to do with that, you know.
Lastly, is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview? And if so, what would it be?
Well, I get disgusted when you go to a public thing like a ball game, and they have to ask the audience to please stand and remove your hat. Why is that necessary? That kind of grabs me. I don't like that. I don't think that's necessary. Don't they have enough a sense of what this is all about? And who do we need singing the national anthem that's hooting and hollering all over the place? You know, just sing it and let the people sing it with them. And the people that, when there's a parade and the flag goes by and they're talking or they're chewing their gum or, you know, they're being disrespectful, I think, for our heritage, and that kind of bothers me, you know. So I think that the younger people have to learn some of those things, and some of them aren't aware that you go into a school and they, over the public address system, as an example, they have, you know, the Pledge of Allegiance, and some of these kids are chewing gum or looking around or doing something that they, you know, and I don't think that's right. I think they should be more respectful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In closing, this has been an interview of Albert Exner regarding his service during World War II. My name is Nicholas Ports. The time is 4:34. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Nick, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
I lost my